Good evening and welcome to the Making Every Lesson Count vlog. And this is the second edition with me, Andy Tharby, and
Shaun, Allison.
And we're very lucky today to have with us the writer of Making Every Geography Lesson Count, Mark Enser.
Hello.
Hi, Mark. And Mark's going to be talking today with us about what he thinks the appeal of making every lesson count is, and some of his own thoughts on how it applies to geography, and hopefully giving us a few ideas to take into making every lesson count too, which Shaun and I are now writing. So, welcome, Mark. And first of all, wanted to ask really, what was the appeal of making every lesson count, the original book, to you when you first read it?
No one really believes when I say this, but the front cover, genuinely, one of the things that really appeals is that statement that you get from that book, which is just elegance. It's just stripped back. I think the illustrations that Jason does throughout the series just kind of typifies that book so well. And that is what the book contains. It's this kind of really stripped back idea that if you just focus on those things that work in the classroom, these are the things that you're going to do and that you want to really master. You're not going to spend ages trying to come up with flashy activities and things to fill the time. What can you do to fill an hour? It's what's going to make a difference for those pupils in that classroom at that moment. And that's what comes across in the book really well.
Okay, that's interesting. Wasn't expecting that answer about the front cover. I think Shaun came up with the elegant idea for the front cover, so you've got him to thank for that. So moving on, how has it influenced you as a teacher, and then secondly, how has it influenced you as a head of department?
I think as a teacher, it's influenced me in two main ways. The first way was just opening my eyes to the amount of educational research that was out there. I'd picked up educational books every so often before and flicked through them, and you didn't really see footnotes and detailed references. It just kind of opened my eyes that there was this side of the job, that as teaching professionals, we could engage in this material ourselves, that it was accessible, that it was there, and it kind of gave pointers to that. I think the other thing that really did for me as a teacher was allowed me to focus on the learning and not the activity. One thing that I really took from it was this idea that it was an end of this culture of doing, and it was moving towards a culture of learning. And I think what I've done as a teacher for years was really focus on activity. So, we are going to do a newspaper front page. We are going to make a shantytown out of bits of cardboard. We are going to do a thing rather than thinking, what is it they're actually going to learn from this thing? And so it kind of made me rethink quite a bit of classroom practice.
Mark,
and it helped. Yeah.
Sorry. Why do you think that we found ourselves as a profession in a position, where, as you described, we'd become obsessed with activity and had almost forgotten about learning?
I think part of it was a desire for that kind of edutainment, a view that pupils couldn't just love our subjects. It always seems a little bit patronising, but there seems to be this idea that it was okay for us to love our subjects as these kind of geeky people who, for some strange reason went to uni and studied geography or science or English, or that's fine, but we couldn't expect them to love it. And so what we had to do was to try and distract children from the subject and kind of trick them into maybe accidentally learning something by giving them these fun activities to do. So I think a lot of it came from that. It was this belief that pupils, it was almost an affront to have children in a classroom in front of an adult expert imparting things to them. That this went against free air and everyone else, this kind of culture of oppression that we were fighting against. And so we became apologists for our subject. And a way of doing that is to say, okay, maybe you have to sit in a geography classroom, but hey, I'm going to bring in some cake and we're going to try and make wave cut platforms from it. So don't worry, it won't be that bad. And I just find it deeply patronising for our young people that we believe that they can't love the same things that we love.
Do you think that there was a difference between this culture that you're talking about here, the difference between that culture and actually what was going on behind closed doors in classrooms during that sort of period about 10 years ago or so that you were talking about?
Yes. I think some of these things were brought out if you thought you were going to be observed. So, we're going to do the observation lesson now because someone's going to come around with a clipboard to an extent. But I still think the tentacles of those ideas were there. Even if you weren't directly entirely convinced that this is what you were supposed to be doing, it was constantly hammered. Every single CPD session, kids only remember 10% of what you say, but 90% of what they do. Constant message that if you're talking, they're not learning. Learning happens once you stop. And it was just this bombardment. And I think to an extent, teachers have always just got on and taught. And I think always that teachers have largely gone, I can't do all of this stuff that they're telling me I'm supposed to do when no one's looking. I'm going to secretly try and teach them something now. But that message was still there. And it's still in the back of your mind. And there's still that slight sense of guilt. I've been talking for 10 minutes now. Oh, how naughty of me. Quick, you go get on with something. It's infected our entire profession.
Right. Going back to my question a few minutes ago, we talked about how it's affected you as a classroom teacher, practitioner. But in terms of sort of as a head of department, as somebody who's implementing these principles across a team, how's it affected you, and how easy have you found that?
I read the book not long after becoming head of department. So I think I've been head of for a couple of years, a year just go, maybe going into 2 years when the book came out, and I read it quite soon after it came out. And I've got an amazing department. They're incredibly experienced teachers. I've been teaching 17 years, and I'm the baby of the department. They've been teaching decades. Most of at least two of them in the school for well over 2 decades. It's a very well established, very experienced team. And at the point I'd gone in, things were absolutely fine. Results were about national average. Option numbers were fine. The kids wouldn't riot. Everyone was fine. I think it was ticking along quite nicely. But they could have been better. And you got a real sense, with the pupils that we've got, they've got a mass amount of potential, hugely supportive parents. And there's a real kind of latent ambition there that we could really tap into. And one thing that I really took from making every lesson count was the idea of establishing kind of a culture of excellence. And as a department, that was our first kind of action plan, was how do we create this culture of excellence? How do we insist that the work people's hand in is to an excellent standard? How do we set that standard as a department? And so we spent time together saying, okay, what does an excellent Key Stage 3 geographer do? What does an excellent Key Stage 4 geographer do? Key Stage 5, what do they do? Let's strip away the exam, the rubric, everything else. As professionals in our subject, what do we think they can achieve? And now let's model that, let's create exemplars for that, and let's show the kids that this is what we're looking for. And now let's put structures in place to mean that they have to hit those standards. One of the simplest things that we did as a department is it took about 30 seconds where I got a poster made up which says something like, if it's not excellent, it's not finished. And at the front of the classroom, just something saying, don't tell me you're finished, ask me, is it excellent yet? And put that up at the front. Didn't really think much of it. Oh, there we go. I can go up at the front of the classroom, kind of on my whiteboard. And within about 5 minutes of the first lesson, there's a kid going, is this excellent yet? And it's like this bit of a joke. They'd say, is this excellent yet? But they would ask. And every single classroom in our department had kids suddenly saying to their teacher, is this excellent yet? And given that excellent opportunity for the teacher to go over and do some live feedback and look through it and say, well, no, because you still need to do this, or actually, that's fairly close, but have you thought about, and let's have a discussion about your work. and so I think kind of establishing that culture really came from making every lesson count.
What Mark, would you say are the challenges of implementing, as a head of department, of implementing a culture that you've just described within the bigger culture of our profession of high accountability, high stakes? I mean, how have you tackled that?
I think one thing that you have to do is you have to be really clear that this isn't going to increase workload. You know, the fear, you know, from any teacher when a head of department goes, "I've got this great idea," is this kind of sinking feeling of, "And when am I going to do it?" You know, it's fantastic. You've got this great idea, you've got this vision, but you know, what's it going to do to my evenings? And so I think one thing that was really important when we sat down and we drew up our action plan of what we were going to do is making sure that we also put on there what we were going to do in terms of a time budget. So if anything we were going to introduce new, what were we going to take away that we were currently doing? So, okay, we are going to spend a bit more time doing whole class feedback. So we're going to reduce the amount of time that we're spending marking pupils' books. We are going to spend a bit more time planning our explanation, but we're going to spend less time creating card sorts. You know, and so showing that actually what we wanted to do could be done without increasing the amount of time. And then secondly, making sure that it was clear that this was going to have an impact. And so just tracking that. You know, and I'm never kind of obsessed with data. I don't kind of teach because of GCSE outcomes and things. But after the first year, those outcomes soared. Option numbers, you know, dramatically increased. We've got twice the number of pupils now taking geography at GCSE and A level than we had before. Pupils love the subject much more and want to take it further. And so being able to demonstrate that it has an effect becomes quite powerful. It's really hard to kind of sell, we need to be doing this, if you can't see it making a difference.
Yeah, and what have been the challenges? I mean, have you had experienced any, you know, kickback against the approach, or, you know, your philosophy as your curriculum leader?
Not really. I think sorry, Shaun, you mic your mic. There's getting weird feedback here. No, not hugely. So I think we're very lucky within our school with our senior leadership team. So there's no kind of issue there at all. They're very keen on kind of evidence-led teaching, evidence-informed teaching. So that's been absolutely fine, and they've been incredibly supportive and gone on this journey with us, really. And from the department as well, because we could make it clear that actually this wasn't going to involve working harder, it was just going to involve doing some things slightly differently. Very quickly, I think people could see the benefit of that. I think the most difficult thing I found was not assuming and not forgetting that not everyone had the time to read and to write and to immerse themselves in these discussions and these debates and to go, oh, okay, you may not have read Carpenter Grimaldi. Okay, you haven't actually read Rosenshine's Principles of Instruction. Oh, you haven't read his original 1980s research. I know, how crazy. No, I'm going to have to actually break this down and discuss it with you. But once you kind of remember that and go, okay, you know, then it's not a problem.
What do you think that the book has brought to the geography teaching world, Mark?
The geography version?
Yeah.
I think from what the feedback that I've had from people, it has helped them to simplify, to streamline what they're doing. I think it's helped people to look at what's happening in the classroom in a slightly different way, to put a different lens on it, to focus on that, what are pupils learning, and also a bit about why they're learning it. I think one thing that I was quite keen to do when I was writing Making Every Geography Lesson Count was to think about it in terms of the wider curriculum. Yeah, I found it really difficult when I sat down to start writing the book, was just to focus on the lesson as kind of this unit. Even if I wasn't saying, okay, it's got to be a 60-minute unit, you know, I was going to say it was, you know, 2 or 3 hours worth of lesson. Because of the way geography works and the way geography is structured, it's really difficult to see any one bit of it in isolation. So one thing that I was having to constantly do was to reflect on the purpose of teaching geography in the first place, and how what you were doing in one lesson built on what came before and was going to lead into what you were doing next. And so I think that's helped some people to kind of put their lessons in that context, and to stop seeing topics in isolation and lessons in isolation, and just to see it as part of a bigger web. So I hope it's helped in that way.
Just sort of building from that, so you've kind of touched on our next question, which is going to be about some of the challenges, really. I just wondered, in terms of the 6 principles, which of them translate really well to geography, and which were a bit harder to write about from your perspective?
Most of them translate really well because they're principles to teaching. They're the things that make up effective teaching, regardless of the subject. So things like practice was kind of quite a nice one to write about. Different types of questioning in geography, and the idea of getting people to think geographically through questioning was useful. Challenge was a really nice chapter to write, looking at what makes challenging concepts in geography. I think probably the hardest one to write in a geographical sense was feedback. It was kind of the hardest one to feel like I was bringing anything new to the book, because feedback in making every lesson count nails it, and so here's what you could do to make feedback more effective. It's quite hard to make that subject specific, and I've read quite a few of the books from the other ones, running through the series, and I think it's the one that tends to feel the most generic. So you put in lots of kind of geography examples, and in everyone's books there's kind of really good examples from other subjects, which I think help people to understand what it is you're talking about. But geographical feedback, as opposed to English feedback, science feedback, the principles are so similar.
Yeah,
it was quite a hard one to make me feel like I was putting a different stamp on it.
Okay, that's interesting. And which of the chapters are you most proud of in the book?
Oh, I don't like to blow my own trumpet, as you know.
No, of course not.
I think the challenge one. I like that. I was trying to introduce some ideas like fertile questions, threshold concepts, things like that, which have certainly had a big impact on me and kind of curriculum design in geography. I think probably just the introduction, the conclusion, talking about the pride I feel in teaching my subject, and geography is one of those subjects that people like to laugh at and jibe and talk about colouring pencils and oxbow lakes and everything else, and the image of the geography teacher and their tweed and their beard, and we get a bit of a hard time sometimes, and these things hurt, and it was nice to kind of put our side forward and to try and reclaim some of that pride of the subject, and to explain why geography was important and why it mattered.
Have you changed your mind about anything that you wrote in the book, Mark?
Not yet. It does worry me. When I wrote a chapter for the research education myths volume, looking at the origin of education myths and how education myths are created, and reflecting on things like VAC and brain gym and all this kind of nonsense that we laugh at now. And you do always get this sinking feeling of how many things could we inadvertently do to create the education myths of the future? Are there things which maybe I haven't explained as well as I needed to? Have I oversimplified something? Have I missed out an important bit of context? Or so it is a worry, because you just don't know. And certainly, I've written things before on things like knowledge organisers, and I think knowledge organisers can be really useful. And then I see a terrible example of a school inflicting some kind of policy on knowledge organisers on their school. And I think, did they get that from reading something that I wrote, or where have they got this terrible idea from? Is it me? So there's nothing yet that I've looked through and gone, that's just wrong. I just hope there's nothing that I've oversimplified and that gets mutated into the next education myth, because I'd hate to have to bust myself.
When we were doing this last week, we were asked a question about if you had to pinpoint one or two educational research papers or books that have had most influence on you, what would they be?
Ooh. I think in terms of a paper, Karpik and Grimaldi's testing and meaningful learning, I really liked the emphasis on what they meant by meaningful learning, and that testing wasn't just something that improved rote recall. It actually led to something much more deeper and more profound. I love Gert Biester's work. I think it's just beautiful. I think The Gift of Teaching is just a lovely paper looking at the need for teaching, not learning, that actually the teacher's role in the classroom is incredibly important, that we're not just there to draw things out of pupils that are already there. There is a degree of bringing pupils into a kind of a revelation through the things that we teach them, this kind of transformative power of education. I think that's had a huge impact. In terms of a book, probably at the moment, this one, Paul Kirshner and Carl Hendricks' latest. It is just wonderful, a kind of collection of different educational papers, and then explaining them and exploring each one. I think it's just a beautiful book. I think the one in terms of geography, where he debates in geographical education, the Routledge series, I quite like reading. My wife, she's English advisor for Ken, and she's got the English version. I love reading that one. I'm determined to track down kind of every subject, because they're just brilliant kind of collection of essays about contemporary issues in different subjects. So work for people like Alex Standish in there, or Roger Firth, people like that, and their views on geography and the curriculum have helped to kind of shape the way that I see my subject. So that's been a powerful read.
So have a look at my questions. So we've talked about the 6 principles approach, and Shaun and I feel that it is time to sort of take that a little bit further. Do you think there's any limitations to the approach? Stepping outside your own role as an author of one of the books here, and how would you hope that we would address those in the second book, if we can? It's all right.
I can't believe I've got to criticise the holy text. This is very confronting. I suppose the biggest limitation, I don't think this is so much a weakness as it is confined to the lesson. It's making every lesson count, and it really focuses down on what you do in that lesson to make sure that what you do has impact. There's probably, it would be great to see kind of an exploration of taking that further into the wider curriculum, and kind of exploring how that fits in to a kind of a bigger curriculum. So I'd hope, and I'd like to see something there, and kind of looking at so the bit towards the end on the kind of whole school approach, but kind of it's linked to CPD, and its kind of implementation across the school would be interesting. Kind of like little case studies of how these things could be embedded in different contexts would be really good to see. But I don't think that's a weakness of the book. I think it's just there's room in the universe.
That's what we're doing.
Excellent.
Trying to place the principles within the context of the curriculum, and then implementation both at a curriculum level and beyond. So I think the initial idea. Sorry,
are you still writing them around the 6? Have you got the 6 pillars?
So we will stick with those because we can't see any reason to change those at this point in time. And then the idea would be to look at the practical classroom implementation. How you do it in a classroom, which is what you were just talking about. But then moving the chapters into thinking about that thinking about, say, challenge or modelling as a curriculum question, and then how might you implement those principles and some of the challenges you might face when attempting to implement them. Anything you want to add, Shaun?
No. Just what I'm interested in, Mark, is us three spend an awful lot of time thinking about education, writing about education, probably far too much time on Twitter and blogs. And I think it's probably fair to say that I mean, outside of our
Bubble.
research bubble, the educational world is still fairly polarized when it comes to research evidence, really. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on, why is that, and what can we do to address it?
I don't know to what extent it's really polarized. It's almost like a polarized between those people who have an interest in it and the vast majority who don't, who aren't even aware these debates and discussions are happening. So they're probably the two biggest groups. I think part of the issue we've got, and again, a kind of BS paper, why what works won't work in education, is a problem with purpose. That there's no agreement, there's no consensus in the certainly the English teaching profession about the purpose of education. We don't all know why we're going into school to do what we do, and we see that at the moment with the debates over wider school opening. Are we there as childminders to keep the economy going? Are we there to boost social mobility? Are we there to impart knowledge, to teach the best that's been thought and said? Are we there to develop character? Nobody can agree. And whenever people try to have the discussion, it immediately either fragments into these kind of dueling camps, or you just get people going, well, obviously it's a bit of everything, we don't need to discuss it. And neither of those two positions are especially helpful. We need, if we're going to have any kind of consensus about educational research and the way that educational research can help us, we have to say what it's supposed to be helping us to do. And I think that's where a lot of the arguments come in. It's not so much that anybody says, oh, retrieval practice is rubbish at helping you to remember things. It's people saying, well, remembering things isn't that important. Or people saying, dweck and growth mindset, doesn't work at all. It's complete nonsense, this idea. It's more about, well, does it matter? Is it something that teachers can really change? Is it something we should be involving ourselves in? That's where the debate, I think, comes in. And until we get some kind of consensus about what education is for, I don't see how we can really move forward. And I think we'll always end up with this big pool of people going, well, this is just, not for me. And then people scrapping around the edges, which is sad, but inevitable.
What do you think education is for?
I think well, I'm a social realist, so I'm a follower of Jung. So for me, it's about that passing on of powerful knowledge. It's opening up pupils to these powerful disciplines that transform the way that they see the world. It's passing on the best that's been thought and said in the world so far, and trying to give them the tools to investigate things further and hopefully add to that pool of knowledge themselves, ready for the next generation. That's what I think education is for, because I think it's the one thing that only schools can do. There are lots of things that schools can do. We can socialise pupils, and we can look after pupils, and we can help to raise them, and we can help to inform them about environmental issues and knife crime and county line drug problems. And we can, but so can lots of other institutions. No one else can pass on specialist subject knowledge. That's the one thing that's unique to us. And so for me, that's the purpose of education, and the rest of it are things that we can maybe help out with, but it's not what should drive us. It's not our prime purpose.
So that sounds very convincing to me. So why can't we agree on that?
Well, we can.
I don't think
we're in a bubble here, Shaun.
because well, at the moment people will say, well, no, it's not for that. It's supposed to be for stopping inequality and about social justice. Or, well, it's not about that. It's about making sure that people go out into the world ready to change it. Our role is to create this generation. We see it in the geography community all the time, quite a large faction who believe that geography education should be about raising this army of young people who are going to take on climate change or single-use plastic or whatever the issue of the day is. That's the purpose of education. So that's why we can't all agree, because we genuinely don't. People want education to do the thing that they think is important.
Yes.
you don't entirely think sure.
Right.
Yeah, the feedback's not great on that. Anything else really that you wanted to speak about Mark? We certainly enjoyed working with you on making every geography lesson count. You were telling me a moment ago before we started that you're writing another book. Might be interesting to finish off.
Yeah, always writing another book. It's an addiction. You guys got me hooked. When I'm sat at my desk. But it is a big process. So yeah, I'm trying to know this one is another book in geography, but focusing just on the geography curriculum. So it's looking at powerful geography. So there's ideas around powerful knowledge, and then looking at what it needs to have a curriculum and a purpose, and then how do we put that purpose into practice? What does it look like when we have this really clear vision what we want our subject to do in practice in the geography classroom? And it really is very much kind of geography specialist kind of field work and geography inquiry, looking at issues like place, geographical context. So I love the research for it, reading for it. So that's next. So it's keeping me busy.
Fantastic. And when do you envisage that being out?
Depends how long we're locked down in both. I keep thinking, sure, give me more time. Then I have to keep teaching from home in these new ways. It takes far longer than I think we should. So I don't know. I will early next year, January. Or before Christmas. Christmas. It'll be
indeed. The sound quality at the end here may be a little bit dodgy. It has been from my end, so we are going to finish up there. But I'd just like to thank you, Mark, from Shaun and I for your time this evening, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. And good luck with the new book.
Yeah, you too. Looking forward to seeing.
Thank you.
Cheers, Mark. Thanks very much.
Bye.